Today I'm going to tell you how, on the very day that should have belonged to my daughter, I was shamed in front of a sea of guests. My new son-in-law tore apart the present I had made with my own hands and demanded the keys to my coastal estate as if they were his birthright. When I refused, he mocked me, loudly, gleefully, and without mercy. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I stepped away, pressed one number, and 20 minutes later, a man appeared beneath the archway. When people realized who he was and what he carried, the room gasped as if a cold wind had blown through the chandeliers. Like, subscribe, and join our Grandma Life Stories community, where we talk about dignity, justice, and resilience, not as slogans, but as the quiet muscles that hold you upright when the room turns on you. Tell me your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here. My name used to be Winona Clark, but today you'll know me as Eleanor Marks. I am 70 years old. I've been a widow for more than 25 years and have lived a discreet, almost invisible life in a gracious Charleston, South Carolina home that belonged to my parents long before me. The house sits a few blocks from the Battery, where tourists lean over the seawall and the breeze carries the scent of pluff mud and jasmine in spring. For years I tended the courtyard camellias, cooked my meals, and kept every room polished and warm with memory. I never flashed cash. Truth be told, most folks assumed I was thrifty, maybe even struggling. I left the illusion alone. It kept me safe. The things I valued lived in stories, in photographs, in a chipped teacup with a hairline crack. No one would notice but me. On the morning of my daughter Lila's wedding, I wanted to give her something honest, something that would tether her to the people who shaped her. For weeks, I had rubbed oil into the grain of an old walnut box my father and I carved when I was a girl. Inside, I arranged an album that spanned generations. Sepia portraits of great-grandparents on a porch that doesn't stand anymore. Snapshots of Lila chasing dragonflies on Sullivan's Island. A note her father wrote the week she learned to ride a bike. I tied it shut with a ribbon of pale blue silk. The gift wasn't shiny. It was the kind of treasure that needs a quiet room and a slow heart. The reception hall at the old Hibernian Society building gleamed that evening. Crystal chandeliers threw soft light across tuxedos and taffeta. Waiters circulated with champagne that hissed when corks leapt. I carried the box toward the dais. The band slid into something hush-sweet. Lila's hands trembled when she reached for the bow. I saw it then. Recognition. For a flicker, she was 8 again, leaning against my shoulder, asking if I would tell her one more story about her daddy. And then Trevor Hale, her brand-new husband, moved faster than anyone could have guessed. Tall, sharp suit, eyes that reflected nothing. He snatched the box from her fingers, worked a grin across his face as if he were performing for a camera, and pitched his voice so the microphones could catch each word. "A photo album," he said. "Eleanor, we don't need antiques. We need your house. That would be a wedding gift." The air thinned. A rustle of disapproval, shock, and delight at the spectacle rolled the length of the ballroom. Lila's cheeks flushed a painful red. She looked down. She did not say anything. Trevor popped the clasp, slid the album out, and instead of opening it, he ripped the spine. Pages cascaded. A picture of 5-year-old Lila wearing a daisy chain skittered across the parquet. A letter from her father glided beneath the head table. The room watched for me to shatter. I didn't. "The gift I brought," I said, my voice steady as a plumb line, "was never for sale." Trevor leaned into the microphone. "You're an old woman alone in a house that's too big. That property should be ours. Hand over the keys tonight and stop clutching what you don't need." Phones rose like cattails in a marsh, murmurs frayed into gossip. A few guests looked at me with soft eyes. More looked at me as if I were withholding something they felt entitled to touch. I bent and picked up a fallen photograph. Lila at 5, laughing, grass stains on her knees. My hand shook, but not from fear. I slipped the photo into my dress pocket and stood upright. "You can tear paper," I said quietly, "but you can't tear the truth of a person." The band faltered into silence. You could hear a glass set down 3 tables away. Trevor turned to the crowd. "Do you hear her? Sentiment instead of sense. My family paid for this night. This should be a celebration, not a museum tour." That was the lie, and Lila knew it. Her shoulders tightened the way they do when someone tells a story that's both plausible and wrong. But she kept her seat. That silence, heavier than his cruelty, is what I'll remember when I'm very old. I clasped my hands, told myself, not tonight, not with an audience, and walked, step after deliberate step. The marble stairs cooled the heat in my chest. I pushed through the doors and stood under the night, the air salty and sharp. I pulled out my phone, pressed the single contact I had set aside months before, and said 2 words. "It's time." I hung up. Inside, the band blared again. Laughter rose, brittle as sugar glass. But I knew the current had shifted. Trevor thought tearing up my gift would fold me in half. He didn't understand that every brutal thing you do in front of people is a confession. The lobby windows stretched tall and clear, and the chandeliers turned every face into a small painting. I could see Trevor holding court, preening for men who admire a bully so long as he reminds them of themselves. Lila sat rigid beside him, her smile cracked, her eyes glancing toward the doors where I had disappeared. I stood beneath the portico, halfway in shadow. The calm that came over me felt like a tide going out. Months earlier, Daniel Price, my attorney, had told me, "You already hold the power, Eleanor. You only need to decide when to use it." I pulled the rescued photo from my pocket. Lila with the daisy crown, her father kneeling beside her. Happiness so uncomplicated it hurt. They deserved better than a spectacle. She deserved better than a man who treated history as scrap paper. A guest stepped out for air, glanced at me with the curiosity people keep when they want a story to tell later, then turned away quickly. That was fine. I preferred their uncertainty. Let wonder do my speaking. Headlights swung into the carriage driveway right on the 20th minute. The sedan rolled to a stop beneath the arch. Daniel slid out with a leather briefcase, the same one he'd carried every time we'd set our plans in motion during the past week. Revocations, assignments, deed records, proxy cancellations, proof. He didn't say, "Are you sure?" Men like him never ask questions they've already answered. We slipped back inside together. People turned, wordless, expectant. I could feel the tilt of the room like a ship leaning in a swell. But before I tell you what happened under the chandeliers, you need to know how we got here. How a man I didn't trust, from the moment he first crossed my threshold, taught me exactly how far he would go. The first time Lila brought Trevor to my home on Trad Street, she rang the bell and laughed in the hall before I even opened the door. That laugh had always been light as wind chimes. He stepped inside with that kind of confidence that doesn't come from accomplishment so much as expectation. His gaze swept the room, not in appreciation but in assessment. He didn't see the hand-pieced quilts, the bookshelf my husband built, the portraits of ancestors who stubbornly refused to fade. He noticed the age of the stove, the patina on the pine floors, the sofa cushions that had lost a little lift. "Cozy," he said at last, making the word do a job it wasn't meant to do. I smiled the way a hostess smiles when the truth isn't welcome. Inside, something pinched. "Isn't it charming?" Lila said, looping her arm through his. "Mama keeps everything warm." He bent to her ear but pitched his voice to Carrie. "You deserve marble counters and vaulted ceilings. This is sweet, but you should have more." She giggled, the sound tight. "Stop. Mama worked hard for this." We sat. I had roasted chicken with rosemary, enlivened potatoes with butter and sea salt, tossed a salad with arugula I'd clipped from the planter out back. Trevor pushed food around with his fork, as if comfort had calories he refused to admit. "It's good," he said, not looking up. "But Lila's palate is wasted here. She should be dining with donors, not eating home cooking every night." He never called me Eleanor. It was Mrs. Marks, clipped, cool, as if he remembered good manners but had stripped the warmth away. I held my line. "My daughter knows her worth, without anyone measuring it for her." He smiled hollowly. "Of course. She just has so much potential. It would be a pity to keep her stuck." Compliments that wear knives are still knives. Every time he praised her, he laced it with an insult toward the life that made her. "You're brilliant, but your job is too small. You're stunning, but those dresses don't suit you." He offered roses with the thorns facing out, and Lila, bless her, blind her, accepted the bouquet. When he stepped onto the piazza to take a call, I heard the edges of his words. Yes, her place. Prime location. Old but valuable. Trust me. He came back with a smile as smooth as a veneer. Lila didn't ask whom he'd been talking to. She didn't because love, especially the kind that mistakes charm for character, lets questions go unanswered if the answers feel dangerous. Later, washing dishes, Lila leaned close. "So, what do you think of him?" I could have said what I thought, that he was ambition standing on tiptoe, that his affection had a purpose, that he loved the idea of her more than the flesh and blood person. Instead, I said, "He has strong opinions." "He's just passionate," she said. "He wants the best for us." I didn't sleep deeply that night. I traced the rim of my teacup and told myself to wait, to be patient, to let time expose what my instinct already knew. It didn't take long. Over the next 2 years, the insults picked up the steady beat of a metronome. The dress I wore to dinner. Vintage, he sneered, as if the word itself were a disqualifier. My 10-year-old sedan. Unsafe, he said loudly in the parking lot. Junkyard bound. The flower shop where I still work twice a week, because arranging a bouquet is its own kind of prayer. Heavy lifting for a woman your age. The smirks came with jokes, the jokes with barbs, and the barbs with Lila's silence. She always smoothed, redirected, poured water over fire without admitting anything was burning. One Saturday, she came alone. We sat on the small upstairs porch under a fan that turned the heavy air into something we could breathe. "Mama?" she began, fingers circling the rim of her mug. "Trevor pushes, but he's not entirely wrong. Maybe this house is too much for you. Maybe you shouldn't have to manage it alone." "It isn't a burden," I said. "It's a life. Your father and I built a family here. I am not superfluous to my own home." "I know," she said quickly, eyes kind but distant. "It's just, times change." The words weren't hers. I heard him in them. 2 months before the wedding, the Hales arrived as a unit. Victor in a blazer that fit like a decision. Marlene with pearls perfectly spaced. Trevor halfway grinning. Lila with a studied neutrality that told me she'd been briefed. They came straight through the foyer into my sitting room and placed a leather folder on the coffee table as if it were an offering or an ultimatum. "Documents," Victor said. His drawl tried to turn bulldozing into hospitality. "It's time we convert your property into liquidity. A woman on her own in a house that size? Dangerous. Let's move you into something appropriate. We'll make sure the funds are managed responsibly." "Appropriate for whom?" I asked. "For everyone," Marlene said gently, folding her hands. "Appearances matter. You don't want to become a spectacle." She grew up in a trailer park outside Macon. I know because I asked around. She had climbed, and every rung she added to her ladder made her ruthless about anyone who might tug it. "Lila and I are about to start our life," Trevor said, leaning back like a man rehearsing for a portrait. "We need a real foundation. Your house is just sitting there." Lila's mouth tightened. "Mama, maybe think about it." I let silence do its work until even the air felt heavy. "This house is my responsibility," I said, "not your investment. It will be mine until I decide otherwise." Victor smiled with no humor. "Roofs rot, taxes rise, pipes burst. You won't outrun that math." "I've outrun worse," I said, "and unlike you, Victor, I have never gambled with what wasn't mine." Something in his jaw jumped. Marlene's kindness snapped into something metallic. Trevor's smirk wavered, then returned. Lila stood without speaking. They filed out as neat as they'd arrived, disappointed the fortress hadn't fallen at the first knock. When the door shut, I sat at the table and stared at the faint dent the folder left in the wood, the way a heavy thing leaves evidence of itself even after it's gone. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I knew what was inside. Contracts described as care, clauses that frowned with concern while they reached for your throat. They had underestimated me. I called Paula Singh, who has been my friend for 30 years and knows more about Charleston real estate than anyone I've met. "Give me a week," she said. "If there's rot in him, I'll find it." She came back in 7 days with a binder that felt like a brick and eyes that said she was sorry she'd been right. "Debt," she told me. "High-limit cards maxed to the edge. Fancy dinners and trips he didn't pay for. A pending suit from a former employer for falsifying accounts. He financed the show with plastic, Eleanor. He has no parachute. Your house is the plan." I sat with that a long time. My stomach burned and then settled. So it was never only love. "Love doesn't tear up an album in public," Paula said. "Protect yourself. He will keep coming." The night after Paula left, I opened the safe hidden behind the bookcase and spread my documents across the table. Deed to the house, leases for 2 small rentals I own outright, investment statements I learned to read when grief taught me I had to. I wrote a note and placed it on top of the deeds. No more cover, no more silence. At dawn, I called Daniel Price. "We move everything out of reach," I said. "Power of attorney revocations, guarantee cancellations, any loose thread that could be tugged, we cut it." He arrived that evening with folders stacked like steps. "Once you sign," he said, tapping each page, "no one but you has authority. No proxy, no guarantor, no back door." I signed until my hand ached the way muscles ache after holding a heavy thing so long you forget you're carrying it. Strength sometimes looks like ink. We locked the documents in a fireproof case and latched the safe. Then I walked the house in the dark, hand sliding across paint warmed by decades of sunlight, and told the rooms you are wanted, because houses die when people stop telling them that. They think all they need is money and repairs. They need devotion, too. The wedding day arrived with anybody's favorite weather. Blue sky washed clean. I buttoned the back of my dress myself. Lila's ceremony was small and sweet at the French Huguenot church, and if the story had ended there, it would be quiet and short. But stories that require courage always see their shadows lengthen toward complication. You already know about the album, about the rip, about the humiliation. Now let me tell you about the return. The ballroom doors opened, and every head swiveled. Daniel walked beside me with the briefcase. We did not hurry. We did not apologize for interrupting joy with reality. The joy wasn't ours to interrupt. Trevor had traded it for spectacle an hour earlier. Trevor set his champagne on the table so hard the flute rang like a tuning fork. "Back so soon," he said. "Come to hand over what you owe us." I met his eyes and didn't blink. I came back for the truth. People leaned forward, phones steadied. Lila's knuckles went white around her napkin. The skin above her collarbone flushed blotchy with a feeling she wasn't ready to name. Marlene whispered to Victor with the precise panic of someone who realizes the party is over, but hasn't found the exit. Daniel set the briefcase on the dais and clicked the latches. He laid out the first stack of papers like a dealer sliding cards face up. His voice didn't need to rise. Calm can carry farther than shouting. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I am Daniel Price, counsel to Mrs. Marks. Effective immediately, any and all financial guarantees once extended from Mrs. Marks's accounts to Mr. Trevor Hale are revoked. The lease for the apartment he has enjoyed without payment terminated as to her obligation. The invoices for tonight, venue, catering, band, that were improperly routed through her estate by the Hales, reassigned to the Hales. Liability now rests exactly where it belongs." A sound ran across the room like wind through palmettos. Trevor's jaw flexed. "You can't do that." "We already did," Daniel said, and he slid the certified receipts onto the table with their timestamps as pretty as gold seals. I raised a hand. "For 2 years you called me old-fashioned and small," I said to Trevor. "Tonight you tore up what cannot be bought. You asked for keys as if my life were a dowry. What you wanted wasn't a home. It was a lifeline for your debts. You will not find it here." Trevor looked to Lila for rescue, the way a drowning man looks for a low branch, and found her staring at him like someone who has finally read the label on a bottle she has been drinking from. She didn't speak, not yet. But silence has edges. He felt them. Daniel wasn't finished. He unfolded another set of documents, thicker, weightier. "There is confusion," he said mildly, "about Mrs. Marks's position. Let me clarify. She is, and has been, the sole owner of assets exceeding $5 million, a house on trad, 2 mortgage-free rentals, and a portfolio built over decades. She lives simply because she chooses prudence over spectacle." The room made that ah sound crowds make when they realize they've been looking at a painting without enough light. A few faces flushed for what they'd thought about me earlier. Trevor's face went the color of raw meat. "She's been hiding," he said. "Who lives quiet like that unless they're scheming?" "People who understand safety," I said. "People who learned that showing off draws the wrong kind of eyes." There was a staccato burst. Applause from one corner that hopped to another and then gripped the room. You could feel the current relocate, the way a flock of birds shifts direction in one wave. Trevor slammed his glass. It shattered, clear shards skittering like minnows. "This doesn't change anything," he said, chest heaving. "You will hand me that house." "The only thing I'll hand you," I said, "is the reality you can't rewrite." His parents stiffened, trapped butterflies pinned to a velvet board. Lila's breath hitched. I turned, not away in defeat, but toward the room in conclusion. The rest, the crack, the collapse, the apology that would take years to bloom, would come. But part 1 ends here, where humiliation met its equal, and the stage Trevor claimed as his became mine. Not because I shouted, but because preparation speaks in a tone that can't be argued with. I placed my palm on the briefcase, closed its mouth, and let the hush settle. The reckoning had begun. The ballroom was no longer a place of music. It was a courtroom without a gavel, a theater without a script. Every guest sat forward, their phones angled like eyes. Trevor's face swelled red, his fists tight at his sides. He had been expecting a surrender. Instead, he was facing exposure. Lila's hands trembled, her napkin clenched so hard it nearly tore. Marlene whispered furiously to Victor, her pearls catching light with every small shake of her head. A moment before, they had been hosts of triumph. Now they were conspirators in a plot unraveling too quickly for them to contain. Daniel's voice was measured, calm, slicing through the silence like a scalpel. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, holding up another document. "If you believe this family has been acting out of generosity, consider this. These accounts show over $100,000 of debt under Mr. Hale's name. Credit cards, unpaid balances, luxury purchases far beyond his means. Furthermore, a pending lawsuit by his former employer alleging falsified financial records. This man does not stand on success. He stands on borrowed time." The crowd erupted. Whispers pitched into open exclamations. Guests turned toward one another with widened eyes. Some laughed in disbelief, others shook their heads with disgust. Trevor slammed his palm against the table. "Lies. This is all lies." But his voice cracked. That small fracture traveled faster than his words. I lifted my chin. "Truth doesn't need to shout, Trevor. Truth only needs to be shown." Phones caught every second. Within hours it would be online, circulating beyond this hall, beyond Charleston, beyond South Carolina. He didn't understand it yet, but the humiliation he tried to force on me had just boomeranged back. Lila finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "Trevor, is it true?" He turned on her, too quick. "They're twisting everything. Don't you see? Your mother is trying to ruin our wedding." The word "our" cracked like a whip. Lila flinched. The audience did too. I said nothing more. Sometimes silence is the loudest evidence. That night, after the ballroom scattered into gossip, after Daniel and I walked away carrying the briefcase, I sat in my study with the lights low. The garden outside was quiet, only cicadas grinding their endless summer hymn. I thought of the first time Trevor had mocked me, my sedan parked across from his glossy car, his whistle, his smirk. I remembered the heat in my cheeks, how I forced myself to smile, how I told myself it was nothing. But contempt is never nothing. Contempt is a seed, and if you let it, it will grow roots through every brick in your house. For 2 years I swallowed those seeds. Tonight I spit them back out. Daniel poured 2 glasses of water. "You know what you did tonight, Eleanor?" I looked at him. I reclaimed my name. He nodded. "And you stripped his." The days after the wedding spun strange. I couldn't walk the cobblestones of Meeting Street without catching whispers. At the market I heard women murmur, "Poor Eleanor. She must be losing her mind. He says she can't handle her finances anymore." That was Trevor's second attack. When spectacle failed, he turned to slander. He filed in court, claiming I was incompetent, that I needed a guardian to manage my estate. Himself, of course. Marcus brought the affidavit to my dining table, laying it flat like a battle map. "He's asking the court to strip your rights." I read every line. Erratic behavior, emotional instability, public outburst. I set the pages down steady. "He calls dignity delusion. Let him." Daniel leaned forward. "We'll fight, and we'll win. But Eleanor, you must understand, this is his most dangerous move yet. Desperation makes men reckless." I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. Desperation makes men sloppy. For weeks, my house turned into a war room. Bank statements, tenant letters, tax receipts, stacked and cataloged. Daniel arranged testimony from doctors, accountants, even neighbors who knew I had kept my affairs in order for decades. One night, Paula visited again. She laid her hand over mine. He's grasping, Eleanor. Only a man drowning reaches this wildly. I know, I said, but let him reach. All he'll find is air. Then came the twist Trevor hadn't counted on. A week before the hearing, my phone buzzed with messages from strangers, old friends, even journalists. Daniel called, voice quick with restrained excitement. Eleanor, the video from the wedding, it's viral. Millions of views. I frowned. Viral? Everywhere. TikTok, Facebook, YouTube. The clip of him tearing your gift, demanding your keys. People are outraged. They're on your side. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the laptop open, scrolling through angle after angle. Shaky phone footage, captions blazing across the screen. Son-in-law humiliates mother-in-law on wedding day. Another read. She offered memories. He demanded her mansion. The comments scrolled by faster than I could read. Respect this grandma. Shame on him. Never betray your mother for greed. I pressed a hand to my chest. For years I had carried humiliation in silence. Now strangers across the country carried it for me. They didn't mock. They didn't pity. They respected. The next morning, when I walked to the market, a young woman stopped me, baby on her hip, eyes wide. Are you her? The lady from the video? I nodded cautiously. She swallowed hard. I just want to say, you're inspiring. My mom lives with me. I promised myself after seeing that clip I'd never let anyone treat her that way. An older man tipped his hat as he passed. Ma'am, you showed dignity. Don't let him take that from you. The weight in my chest loosened for the first time in months. Trevor had tried to bury me in shame. Instead, he gave me a platform. Daniel saw it too. He came by with his phone in hand. You've become a symbol. Hashtags everywhere. Respect Eleanor. Grandma Strong. Advocacy groups for elder rights are picking up your story. I exhaled. Then let them. If my pain opens eyes, then it isn't wasted. The mail began to flood with letters. Packages, too. A quilt stitched by a woman in Ohio. A donation check from a man in Texas. Notes from grandchildren who promised to defend their grandmothers better than Trevor had defended me. I didn't need their money. My accounts were sound, but I needed their voices. They reminded me I wasn't alone. On TV, I saw my own face. The anchor spoke words like resilient and symbol. Experts called it elder abuse, financial exploitation. They said laws needed to change. Trevor thought he could reduce me to a caricature. Instead, he turned me into a cause. That evening, the phone rang. It was Lila. Her voice trembled. Mom, it's everywhere. My coworkers saw it. They keep asking how I could let him treat you like that. I don't know what to say. I listened, then answered quietly. You don't need to say anything. The truth is already speaking, but you do need to listen. Ask yourself why the world sees him so clearly, and you cannot. Silence stretched, then softly. Maybe I was afraid of seeing it. Her words cut and healed at the same time. At least she had spoken them. The hearing came. The courthouse smelled of wood polish and age. I sat with Daniel, hands calm on the table. Trevor sat opposite, pale but still defiant. Marlene clutched her purse as though it could shield her. Victor stared at the floor, jaw tight. The judge entered. The gavel struck. Trevor's lawyer argued first, painting me as fragile, erratic, unfit. He played the wedding video, trying to spin my silence as instability. Then Daniel stood. His voice was glass. Your Honor, this video does not show incompetence. It shows restraint. Mrs. Marks walked away with dignity. That is not weakness. That is strength. He laid out my records. Investments stable, tenants loyal, taxes paid on time. Doctors testified to my clarity. Trevor squirmed. The arrogance that fueled him shriveled under every document, every word. The judge leaned forward. After review, this court finds no evidence that Mrs. Marks lacks capacity. Petition denied. Furthermore, Mr. Hale, you are cautioned against manipulating legal processes for personal gain. The gavel cracked. Trevor's head dropped into his hands, and Lila stood. She whispered, "I can't do this anymore," and walked out without glancing back at him. That was the day the chains broke. But the story wasn't finished, because what began as humiliation had become something larger, something I had never expected. The courthouse verdict should have been the end. Logic would suggest a man shamed in public, stripped in court, would retreat into silence. But Trevor was not a man built on logic. He was built on hunger, and hunger never admits it has been fed enough. I heard it first in whispers on King Street, murmurs by shop doors. He says she's unstable. He says she's scheming. His poison lingered, but it was weaker now, diluted by the flood of eyes watching him. He no longer controlled the narrative. The world did. A week after the ruling, lawsuits began piling against him. His old employer filed formally. Mismanagement of accounts, falsified ledgers, nearly $50,000 in misappropriated funds. Civil claims followed, former clients alleging deceit, friends demanding repayment of loans he had never intended to honor. The mansion keys he once demanded became an image of irony. Instead of holding them, he held summonses. I did not gloat, but I would be lying if I said I felt nothing when word spread that Victor's investments had collapsed in a wave of debt. Without Trevor's promised access to my estate, the Dawsons had nothing to prop their image. Their house on Ashley Avenue went on the market. The pearls Marlene had flaunted became the subject of pawnbroker whispers. For decades, they had lived with their backs stiffened by pride, noses lifted high. Now I saw them once in the market, Marlene's chin no longer lifted, Victor's gait no longer firm. They did not meet my eyes. Shame is a heavy garment. It bent their shoulders more effectively than any words of mine could. But revenge wasn't my aim. Justice had already spoken. My aim was preservation of myself, of my dignity, of the legacy my late husband and I had built brick by brick. In Daniel's office one evening, I signed a new stack of documents. Not protections this time, but creations. "The Marks Foundation," I said, my voice quiet but resolute. "For elders exploited by those who should protect them." Daniel looked at me over the rims of his glasses. "You're turning your humiliation into a weapon for others." "Not a weapon," I corrected. "A shield." Word spread quickly. Advocacy groups reached out. Volunteers offered time. Donations flowed, not because I needed them, but because others would. One letter from a woman in Michigan read, "Because of you, I told my son no when he tried to take my savings. Thank you for giving me courage." Another from a man in Arizona. "You reminded me of my mother. I wish I had stood up for her. Now I'll stand up for others." I read each letter at night by lamplight. They reminded me that humiliation, when endured with dignity, could be transformed into a torch. The videos continued to circulate. On news broadcasts, they called it the wedding humiliation that sparked a movement. On social media, hashtags bloomed. Grandma Strong. Respect Eleanor. It was surreal. I had lived quietly for 70 years, careful, modest, and now my face was everywhere. I couldn't walk the harbor without a stranger nodding or stopping me. Some asked for photos, others simply said, "Thank you." But fame is never free. I also received hate, anonymous letters calling me greedy, accusing me of destroying my daughter's marriage. Trevor's defenders, rare though they were, spat venom online. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The weight of evidence already had. One humid evening, the cicadas louder than usual. The phone rang. "Mom," Lila whispered. Her voice cracked. I left him. For a moment, silence pressed between us. She inhaled shakily. I stayed too long. I let him speak for me. I let him twist my words, twist me. But after court, after everything, I saw. I can't deny it anymore. Tears pricked my eyes. "Lila, it's never too late to walk away." "I don't know where to go," she admitted. "He drained everything. I thought we had a future, but all we had was his debts." My voice steadied, though my heart ached. "Come home. Not as a child, not as a dependent, but as my daughter. We will rebuild." She sobbed softly. "You still want me?" I closed my eyes. Doors close to greed, Lila, never to repentance. She returned quietly, without fanfare, one suitcase in hand, her shoulders bent under weight heavier than luggage. She looked at me with the eyes of a little girl again, the eyes of someone who had lost herself and was searching for the way back. "I'm sorry, Mama," she whispered, her voice breaking. I pulled her into my arms. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it releases the present, and that's enough. We sat in the courtyard that night, candles flickering, jasmine blooming. We did not speak of Trevor, or the Dawsons, or the court. We spoke of recipes we'd forgotten, of summers at Sullivan's Island, of her father's jokes. The laughter was fragile, but real. For the first time in years, my house felt like a home again. Not a fortress, not a battlefield. A home. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest stones. 2 years passed. The videos still circulate occasionally, resurfacing in comment threads, used as examples in advocacy trainings. But my life has quieted again. I rise each morning to sunlight falling across the courtyard walls. I tend the roses, pruning carefully, teaching them to grow stronger with each cut. Neighbors drop by with bread, with coffee, with greetings that carry respect instead of pity. The foundation thrives. We have helped dozens of elders across the state secure their rights, protect their homes, defend their dignity. Some days I walk into the office and see faces I've never met thanking me with tears in their eyes. Those moments matter more than any applause in a ballroom. Lila visits often. She has started over, slowly, carefully. She has her own small apartment now, but she spends weekends here. We cook together, laugh together. Sometimes she apologizes again, her voice cracking. I remind her gently, we learn from the past, but we don't live in it. One evening, as twilight painted the sky pink over Charleston, I sat on the porch with my journal. I wrote words I have carried since that night of humiliation. Sometimes, to save a family, you must be willing to lose it. I underlined it once, not as a wound but as a truth. When I looked up, Lila was standing at the gate watching me with cautious eyes. I smiled. "Come sit," I said. And she did. The night air in Charleston has its own weight, thick with salt and jasmine, a reminder that storms always pass, but leave the scent of survival behind. I remember sitting on the veranda, the sound of cicadas steady, Lila asleep in the upstairs bedroom, where she once whispered childhood secrets. I wrote in my journal under the soft glow of the lamp, "Strength is not in what we hold, but in what we release." Sometimes the greatest victory is quiet. The city seemed to move differently after everything. Neighbors who once whispered now greeted me with warmth, with a nod that meant more than words. A man at the bakery tucked an extra loaf into my bag with a wink. A young woman stopped me on the corner and said softly, "You remind me of my grandmother. She raised me. I'll never forget how you stood tall." Trevor had clawed at every corner of my life, but what he gave me though he never meant to, was a voice louder than I had ever sought. Advocacy groups invited me to speak. At first I hesitated. I was no speaker, just a woman who wanted a quiet life. But they told me stories, mothers stripped of homes, widows conned by children, grandmothers discarded for their assets. I realized my silence would serve only men like him. So I spoke. The first time was in a library auditorium with 80 people. My hands shook as I gripped the podium, but once I began, the words poured from me as if they had waited all my life. I told them of the wedding, of the album torn, of the demand for keys. I told them of walking out with my head high, calling Daniel, standing in the storm, not with rage but with resolve. The audience listened as if their own mothers stood beside me. When I finished, the applause startled me. It wasn't for spectacle, it was for recognition, for every woman who had been dismissed. From there, the foundation grew. We helped secure restraining orders for women threatened by greedy children. We fought guardianship petitions meant to strip elders of their homes. We educated communities about financial exploitation. Newspapers called me a symbol of resilience. I never thought I would carry such a word, but I carried it with humility. Trevor faded from headlines. The lawsuits swallowed him whole. He lost his job, then his standing, then whatever pride he had left. I heard he moved out of state, chased by creditors. I never looked for him. Men like that find their own ruin. His parents sold their house, their voices no longer sharp but hushed, stripped of the arrogance that once coded every word. I passed them once near Broad Street, their steps hurried, their eyes avoiding mine. That was enough. Life with Lila was not easy at first. Trust doesn't bloom the moment someone returns. It grows like a vine, needing sun and pruning. She often cried when she remembered her silence at the wedding. I never denied the hurt, but I refused to chain us to it. I told her, we do not forget, but we can forgive. Forgiveness doesn't erase, it releases. She clung to those words, repeating them until they became her own prayer. One evening we cooked together in the kitchen. She chopped onions while I stirred the pot, and suddenly she laughed, a sound I had almost forgotten. I looked at her, and in that moment, she was not the woman bent by Trevor's shadow, but the girl who once tugged at my apron asking for cookies. My heart softened. The past had been cruel, but the present held grace. Seasons passed. The garden bloomed brighter each year. Roses I thought would die after storms grew stronger after pruning. People often told me they looked healthier than ever. I would smile and say, they learned from me. You endure storms, you prune, then you bloom again. 2 years after the wedding, the foundation held its first major conference. Hundreds gathered from across the state. Survivors shared stories of reclaiming their homes, their dignity. Lawyers offered advice. Volunteers signed up to help. When I stepped onto the stage, I thought of the ballroom, of the torn album, of 150 faces waiting for me to break. And I thought of how far I had walked since then. I didn't speak of revenge. I spoke of respect, of boundaries, of dignity. I told them that sometimes you must be willing to lose a family to save yourself. And sometimes, if grace allows, that family returns, healed by truth. The applause was long, but I didn't stay to bask. I slipped out early, walked into the Charleston evening, and let the sounds of the city wash over me. That night, Lila sat with me on the porch. She leaned against my shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for not closing the door on me." I kissed the top of her head. Doors close to greed, Lila, never to repentance. When I rose to go inside, I paused by the study window. On the desk lay my journal, the leather worn, the pages filled with lessons written not just for me but for whoever came after. I knew someday, long after I was gone, someone would open it and see what one quiet woman did when pressed too far. I closed the lamp, let the house rest, and whispered into the stillness. Strength is not what they take from you, it's what they cannot touch. The night settled around me. The mansion stood steady, not as a prize, not as a fortress, but as a witness, and in its silence I finally felt peace